Today we have the pleasure of meeting Professor Berardo Cori from the University of Pisa. This is really our first window onto geography in Italy. And I'm very happy to welcome you, Berardo. We are the same age.
Yes, it is.
Right, well, what I'm curious about is first your own background and why you became a geographer, and then later to go into questions about geography in Italy, along the lines of that marvelous presentation which you have just made to the International Congress.
Well, I was born in 1938, and I was educated mainly in Pisa, in the same town in which I am now at the university. Well, I first entered in the Faculty of Political Science in Pisa in 1956 because my wish, or my dream maybe, was to become a diplomat. But studying, since the first year of the university, studying political geography, I easily understood that my interest was not so much in political problems, but in the geographical basis of the political problems. And so I changed the idea and asked my professor of geography to follow my degree in political geography. I got this degree in 1960. The theme of the degree was truly a political geographical one, that is the political problems connected with the continental shelf. There was then a theme very actual because there had been a conference on the law of the sea about continental shelf. But after the degree, so to speak, I changed another time my preference, and I turned towards economic and urban geography. So I began to work about the economic geography of some regions of Italy, such as Tuscany or the Abruzzi in the other side of the peninsula. And I had my first experience abroad in 1963, going to Corsica. Yes. Well, it's abroad only in a certain sense. It's abroad because it's in France, but it's quite close to Tuscan coast, as you know very well, and quite close to Italy also in use and way of life and other things. This was also my first contact with French geography, because before going to Corsica, I frequented some weeks the University of Aix-en-Provence with Professor Isnard, which was there in Aix-en-Provence because the University of Nice did not exist in 1963. Afterwards, he came to Nice. Yes. Returned to Italy, I prepared my PhD in Italian. The name was Libera Docenza, for which it was not necessary to study a particular subject, but rather study many arguments and write many little papers and little articles. So I got the Libera Docenza in 1968 in economic geography, and this was the base to be appointed in the university as an associate professor, first at the Università della Tuscia at Viterbo. It was a small private university, and in 1972 as a full professor at the old University of Padova. I was very well in Padova, but I stayed there only 1 year because the claim of Pisa was,
the homeland.
Was too much important for me, and so I returned. I went back to Pisa in 1973, and from 1973 I never more moved from the University of Pisa. Another little shift of my, well, more than a shift, my research interest, a more precise way to do research was to specialize myself in two more not small fields, but very clearly limited fields that are industrial and urban geography. In all the period after 1973, I did research effectively in industrial and urban geography. I focused my attention especially on small industry, small business, and small and medium-sized towns. That is the environment of our university and the environment in which I was most easy to move myself. And these are still my main interests, even if my participation in the IGU commissions include both Urban Systems Commission and since 2 years ago also the History of Geographical Thought Commission.
But I'm curious, you see, you jumped over the university period very quickly. You got your degree in 1968.
Yes.
In economic geography.
Yes.
That means you must have been very much in tune with what was happening in the social sciences in the late 60s.
Yes.
At least if I can go from my own experience. Were you affected by the 60s feeling emancipatory movement in the social sciences?
Oh, I think very little.
Really?
My reactions are normally a little slow, and I realized the transformations of the late 60s and the early 70s only a few years after.
So that had nothing to do with your choice of focus, moving away from continental shelf political geography and moving to small and medium-sized industry and cities. It had nothing to do with
no,
your
I think
social
it was
philosophy.
quite a personal itinerary.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And you have continued with that work. In
Yes.
what would be the kind of urban industrial geography? Would it be regional science type, or would it be morphological?
Well, in the first time it was most morphological, but in the second time I became more interested in applications of my study. So starting with the mid-70s, I began to collaborate with such private or semi-private foundations, such as, for example, the Fondazione Agnelli in Turin, which is from Fiat, of course, and to study the really the applied side of industrial and urban geography. And in this period, I became aware of the futility, don't know if this word exists in English, yes. Futility of the problem of limits of geography. Yeah. Because I began to work with economists, both political economists and business economists, and I realized with a certain surprise that our interests were broadly the same. So I abandoned certain prejudices of method that I had before, and I began to think that perhaps we don't need so much, at least, to have many disciplines, because we have many problems to solve, and a discipline is important if it contributes to solve the problems. And
that could be something our generation.
My approach became a little less academic and much more practical. Pragmatic. Yes. This was not seen so well in Italian geography.
Did you get criticized for that?
Yes.
Yes? But you didn't suffer career-wise.
No, because I have been lucky to have a relatively quick career and to reach full positions when I was only 34. So I was still maturing, but in the same time I was in a position to mature in which direction I wanted. So I can recognize that I have been very lucky.
You can afford to be radical in your ideas. You can afford the kinds of things you do.
Yes.
I was really struck when I read your essay in this book about geography in Italy since World War II by the openness and I think courageous way in which you assess geography in Italy. I haven't spoken to any other Italian geographer, but this is certainly one of the most interesting essays in the book. I'd like you to speak now a little on geography in Italy, along the lines that you presented to us at the Congress.
Yes. Well, first of all, I would say that thank you for your words. Openness, surely. Courage, it was not much courage necessary to write these things. And maybe 90% of Italian geographers haven't read that, so I have no reactions. Maybe when the Italian translation will be available at the end of this year, some reactions. But well, I can try to summarize. Italian geography was a very good sector in the 19th century, and I am truly surprised in certain moments of our present state of depression, just because in 19th century we were a good country from the point of view of geography. We had a good tradition, as you know, in African exploration, but also as a scientific discipline. The 19th century Italian geography was at a very good European level. It was not so much an original school, a national school. It was influenced mainly by the French school. French was the first foreign language for Italy in the 19th century and all the first half of the 20th. And to a certain degree also by German geography, because northeastern Italy has traditionally submitted to certain German influences. Well, so in France, 19th century and the first half of the 20th century was the Vidalian school that was dominant, and so Italian geography became a Vidalian geography in the classic sense of the word, with a little more stress on general geography because of the German influence. So we combined the Medaillon, the Géographie régionale of the French, with some allgemeine Geographie from the German world. Well, we had a lot of important geographers. I can give only a few names, such as Olinto Marinelli, Roberto Almagià, Renato Biasutti, Umberto Toschi, not in a precise order, not chronological, and Antonio Renato Toniolo, or Giotto Dainelli, or Renato Biasutti, maybe
Biasutti.
Yes. And well, the good European level, I can demonstrate with some examples. In 1892, there was in Italy one of the first international geographical congresses.
Yes.
And when the University of Cairo in Egypt put a competition for the chair of geography in the university, it was an Italian to win this international competition, was Giotto Dainelli. Well, up to in 1947, still in 1947, even if Italy was there in a bad international position just after the war, Roberto Almagià was appointed as one of the vice presidents of the IGU. We had never any other representative in the IGU afterwards. And also from the internal point of view, Italy's geography was very strong in the schools, in the universities. In the National Research Council there was a special committee for geography who had many funding for research, and so the things appeared to be very good up to the half of the century. But after this good generation of geographers, the following generation, that is the students of this great generation, were not at the level of the preceding generation. What I mean is they were also competitor, clever scholars, but they continued to study in the same way of the preceding generation. They continued to study and to teach and to form new geographers as if nothing new there was in geography after the fundamental acquisitions of the Vidalian school or the German school. So they ignored completely all that was new in the 50s, in the 60s, and so on. They ignored completely the new strong tendencies in Anglo-Saxon geography, for example. Anglo-Saxon geography did not exist for them. And the consequences have been that even if the number of geographers has steadily increased in Italy, and so the amount of production, that is the number of geographical articles, papers, books, has steadily increased in the last decades, that has been what I defined in the book, much ink about nothing, because it was repetitive, the continuous, the same formula, the same paradigms, in certain cases, even the hagiographic paradigm, that was a good paradigm, in my opinion, was interpreted in a particularly dull way. So, what's now? Now, in Italy, a quantitative revolution, for example, has arrived to Italy, but with 10 or 15 years late, when it was overcome abroad. And we have practically a very few quantitative geographers in Italy, even if we live in a country in which mathematical science is very advanced. So we have no humanist geography in Italy, even we live in the country of humanities, in the classical country. So we have, for example, a lot of Marxist geographers, of course, but not a Marxist geography, not at all. So, for example, we are not appreciated in planning, because our paradigms are so infant, I would say, and no useful for normally for the real life, for the actual life of business, of state, of corporations, of regions, and so on. So I defined in the book geography and planning an appointment missed in Italy. Well,
but could I bring up the question that was raised by the Indian colleague? Maybe you didn't miss a thing, you know, that the quantitative revolution has swept through various Anglo-Saxon and other lands, and now in retrospect of 20, 25 years, there are many lessons that have been learned about appropriate or inappropriate ways of using quantitative methods. Is it not conceivable that Italy is in a very good position now to take a critical look and adopt just what is appropriate?
No, I don't agree, absolutely. No? Because one cannot ignore or jump a phase of the scientific evolution.
No?
We could, of course, learn quantitative methods, criticize them, refuse them if we want, but not ignore. This is the problem, in my opinion. We have ignored. Now, in Anglo-Saxon geography, you could speak of post-quantitativism, but how in Italy? There has not been a quantitativism. There cannot be a post-quantitativism.
And what about humanism? the land of humanism, you said.
Well, humanistic geography, in my opinion, is a very fascinating point of view. But I have still not tried to do it in Italy, because the lateness of Italian geography is not a phenomenon of others, it's also a phenomenon of mine. So I too, I am very slow in following the evolution. I began just this year to give some subjects of degree on humanistic geography, and I am maybe a little bad, because I would try with the students what they think of, with younger students, what they think of it, how do they deal with these subjects, to try the effects on the younger generation of this new direction in geography. And afterwards, maybe I will try myself to.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that you are experimenting with the younger generation. You know, you and I are sitting perhaps in the middle of a movement which we don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful that you have opened this window for us onto Italy. Thank you.
Never mind, it was my pleasure.
Good.